I am Mary Sketch with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, and I am for the soil to protect the landscapes, waterways, and resources that provide the food that we all eat and the lands that we recreate on for current and future generations.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii. Today we'll be talking about the amazing diversity of Virginia soil types, from the eastern shore of Virginia to the Piedmont to the south side to the Shenandoah Valley. Virginia is blessed with a wide range of soils. Our special guest will be Dr. John Galbrai. He's professor at Virginia Tech School of Plant and Environmental Sciences, and Eric Benfelt, who's an extension specialist for community viability with Virginia Cooperative Extension. We'll also cover some core principles of soil health. And keep in mind, you can learn more about soil health at the website forthesoil.org. That's the digit 4, thesoil.org. Let's go to the show. Welcome again to For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and hello to each of you gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this edition of For the Soil, a conversation.
Good morning, Jeff, and thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And Eric, we've got a lot to talk about in this episode. I've watched some YouTube videos with Dr. John Galbrai, who is a renowned resource in Virginia and really nationwide on soil geology, soil types, and soil health. And I've been watching some of those YouTube videos, Dr. John, and I have to say that I have learned a lot. As a matter of fact, I'll kick it off with saying I've learned a brand new word, Pamunkey soil. And I'm a fan of history. So the Virginia History podcast is one of my favorite podcasts, and so I know a lot about the history of the Pamunkey Indian tribe, but I had no idea that it's a soil type. As a matter of fact, it's the primary soil type I've learned.
It is. In fact, it's such a special type of soil that it was selected to be our state's nominee as the state soil. And one reason for that is that it forms along the major rivers that flow across the coastal plain. But in particular, the James River is really a nice representative river for Virginia because it flows across 4 of our 5 physiographic regions. And so the soils that are deposited on the floodplains and terraces of the James River, you might say, are a blending of the entire Commonwealth. And so that's why. And the Pamunkey happens to also be probably the single most productive soil in the Commonwealth as well. And many times the state record yields for small grains or corn or other products, soybeans, are set on the Pamunkey soil because of its wonderful physical and chemical properties. So it's a good representative for the Commonwealth.
Obviously, it's a very good soil. It was just 2 years ago that Virginia farmer David Hula set a world record for corn yield at 616 bushels of corn per acre on Pamunkey soil there along the James River.
Amazing. And it is an excellent soil because of its properties. It's not too clayey. It's not too sandy. It's right in the middle. It's got a good mixture of sand, silt, and clay. And then chemically, it's because the James River heads up in the limestone regions of the Valley and Ridge province, then it's bringing some calcium and magnesium and other nutrients that might be missing from some of the more highly weathered and leached soils that are found in other parts of the coastal plain. So it's uniquely fertile. Natural fertility as well.
Eric Benfelt, let's bring you into the conversation and understand that our primary topic today, and we're going to try to stretch this into 2 podcasts because there's a lot to talk about with Virginia soil health with Dr. John Galbrai, But our primary topic in this episode is going to be the overall diversity of soil types in Virginia. And I have to confess, I pulled up a soil map of Virginia this morning in my initial research, and it honestly looks like a rainbow. There's so many colors from the eastern shore through the Piedmont region, through western Virginia. Eric, if you could talk about the diversity of soil types we have in Virginia.
Well, I think as John said, you look at how soil has been formed through time, both from the geology as well as the natural influences of that, and with that diversity from the eastern shore, the Tidewater area, to the Ridge and Valley area of the Shenandoah Valley in southwestern Virginia, it really provides a unique opportunity for Virginia in regards to agriculture, horticulture, forestry, and land management as a whole. And I think certainly with this effort of For the Soil and talking with John, really able to highlight that the ground on which we stand is really significant and has a unique history to it, both with natural influences as well as human influences. And we're fortunate to have John be able to share both the history as well as ways that we as soil managers can help in the improvement of soil, no matter where we are in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
And Dr. John Galbrai, once again with the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech, I wanted to ask you a question that involves history, and that involves the Jamestown settlement and the development of tobacco and other crops here in Virginia, the colony of Virginia. What do you think the settlers were thinking when they arrived on the shores of the James River? What was in their minds when they compared European soils to what they found in Virginia?
Well, that's a very good question. I think for the settlers that arrived from England and Ireland, they were used. The ones in England were probably used to having pretty fertile soils. Those soils were derived. A lot of them in southern England are derived from limestone type materials, which gives rise to really naturally fertile soils. But then when they arrived in the U.S., the first experience, at least in the Jamestown area, they would have been in a low-lying area that was wet. The soils would have been fairly acidic. They would have had real challenges with trying to adapt some of their crops that they might have been used to growing to the soils that they found near Jamestown. Now, later on, as people expanded their range, then they encountered more fertile soils that were more used to what they were coming from. But on top of the soils being different and those challenges, they literally, I'm certain, would have learned how to grow crops and would have learned about new crops from the native people. And the people that they were interacting with would have been a great help to them as far as helping them adapt both new types of crops, and then also learning how to make successful agriculture in the region. And tobacco and cotton were two of the crops that were found. Especially tobacco was one that was such an important cash crop that for export back to Europe, that's what they primarily focused on. And fortunately, tobacco will grow in fairly acidic soils, and so they were able to be successful with tobacco fairly quickly.
Erica, you're a specialist in community viability. Sometimes I wonder if the settlers had not arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, but perhaps Punta Gorda, Florida, or somewhere like that, the soil types. Was it because they landed in Virginia, a land of really fertile soils, that community was ultimately viable?
Well, that's such a good question, Jeff. I think, if we think about, history and civilizations that, were very productive and thrived, but then when they did not really regard and value the soils, thinking about Mesopotamia and what would be, near the Tigris and Euphrates River, other areas, that, as John has says, there's soils that have inherent properties, in some cases very fertile, in other cases maybe less fertile and would require more care and management. And I think John could certainly speak to this, that as they're formed, you have some soils that are somewhat forgiving, and then others that, if they're poorly managed, can be quite unforgiving because of the way they have been formed through time. One thing I did want to ask John, just sort of stepping back, certainly John's a professor and teacher, but I was also curious how he became such a student of soil and soil science. That might be of interest to our listeners.
Well, from my background, I grew up in an area where in South Texas, and of course, growing things was just always something of personal interest to me when I was growing up. I did pay a lot of attention to the soil in the garden in my backyard, but never really considered it as a possible career type interest. I always thought, well, I'll always have a garden, and that's as far as I put it. And then I thought I'll have to, come up with some type of major income, so either as an engineer or some other type of profession. But then when I went to school at Texas Tech University, I transferred and I changed majors, and I was searching for a major, something that caught my interest. And my brother asked me on one of our vacation trips with the family, what do you like? And instantly, before I could even think about it, I pointed out the window of the car and I said, that. And he said, what? And I said, everything that you see outside the window. I said, the trees. Why are the trees large here? Why is the grass greener on one side of the fence than the other? Why is the soil dark here? Why is the bedrock shallow over there? And I had been staring out the window this entire, vacation trip. And that's why I just realized to myself, I didn't have to think about that. That was just always inherently interesting to me. When I went back to Texas Tech the next semester, I explored options and found out that you can actually major in soil science and actually get a degree and a job in that. And so I was lucky enough to find that passion. And once I started learning and taking some soils courses, I found that I didn't need to force myself to read materials or force myself to go out and look at soils, that I really just enjoyed every moment of learning about it. And I was fascinated by the fact that the soil was so diverse. And when I was driving from San Antonio, my hometown, to Lubbock, Texas, where Texas Tech is, I was crossing about 4 different physiographic regions. Just like if you were in Virginia, if you were in Covington area of West Virginia, and then you drove all the way across the state and ended up at Virginia Beach, you would have crossed a similar variety of landscapes and soils. And if you looked at the road cuts along the way and saw how the landscapes changed and how the agriculture changed and how the native vegetation changed. That was the experience I had. And so then it became fascinating to me as why were these areas so different? And I found that I could learn about the plants, but that humans can manipulate the plants. They can change the vegetation. I wanted to learn about the geology, and that was interesting, but what I found was that the soil tied it all together.
We're talking today with Professor John Galbrai with the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech. And gentlemen, just a couple of minutes left in this podcast, and of course we're going to continue this with a part 2 of our conversation, because I want to ask you about the Virginia Tech soil judging team and also about the New River Valley Gleaning Network. I want to talk about that, but we try to cover a principle, one of the 4 core principles of soil health in each of our podcasts. Dr. John Galbrai, could you talk a little bit about the importance of rotating crops, keeping that diversity in a productive field?
Yes, I think crop rotation is very important, both from the aspect of the soil resources, but also as far as pest management, and as a way to avoid infestations of insects and pests that overwinter in the root systems or in the soil. It's very necessary to practice crop rotation. Different plants uptake different amounts of nutrients and in slightly different ways and at slightly different depths in the soil. And then also different plants have the ability, because their root systems are different, to put carbon back into the soil. And so it's important to not to deplete your soil of necessary nutrients, and to also make sure that you're growing crops and that add carbon back to the soil.
Very good information. And we're going to continue this conversation in the next podcast of For the Soil, a conversation. Thank you again for joining us, Professor John Galbrai with the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech, and Eric Benfelt, Community Viability with Virginia Cooperative Extension.
It's been my pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Jess.
For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was obtained through the Free Music Archive and is attributed to Jason Shaw and Mr. Smith. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Hische.